Hello and welcome to Eavesdropping at the Movies. I'm Mike.
And I'm Jose.
And we've just come back from the cinema where we've seen Dream Scenario.
Yes.
The new sort of black comedy fantasy film starring Nicolas Cage. I'd say it sits alongside... I always associate these kinds of films with Charlie Kaufman. I think he kind of kick-started a new era of this kind of comedy fantasy that's essentially set in the real world, but with a twist on everything. So here, the twist is that Nicolas Cage's character is this PhD university professor. He's an evolutionary biologist. He wants to write a book. He's got a wife and 2 kids. They're happy, but he's kind of meek and mild and all this kind of thing. And he starts showing up in people's dreams. Not necessarily people that he knows, and not everybody dreams of him, but he just starts showing up, and he becomes this kind of minor celebrity because of it. And there will be spoilers, things develop. And I kind of associate this with like, remember we saw Downsizing, which is not Charlie Kaufman, but it has a similar sort of thing, like real world, but there's technology that can make people tiny. Charlie Kaufman obviously has like Eternal Sunshine of the Spotless Mind and Being John Malkovich, which one is about technology, one is about just kind of magic that people can go inside John Malkovich's head. But even before that, it definitely didn't originate with him. Like, if you think about like Groundhog Day is similar, maybe things like Heaven Can Wait or Matter of Life and Death have similar aspects.
I was thinking more of films like Her.
There's certainly a relationship, I think, or a similarity.
Because I do think that it's a film that is both a kind of a critique of contemporary culture, right? So, I was reading in Wiki that Peter Bradshaw saw it as a kind of a take on celebrity. But I think it's about much more than celebrity. It's also about university culture and cancel culture. And it has kind of philosophical implications. So, reality and dreams are always distinguished, but the ethics of it, who bears responsibility for your dream, right?
Yeah,
are things that are put into play in the narrative. So I think it's a film that I initially thought of as a kind of a contemporary Woody Allen film.
Yes, that's another good reference
because,
point.
Some of the speech patterns and some of the way of making jokes was very similar to Woody Allen, though I thought Woody Allen was less knowledgeable about the philosophical things he talked about. So he made glib references to Marshall McLuhan, for example. So you didn't get a sense that he actually had read or understood kind of those things he was referencing, whereas in this film I thought you did, actually. But the film is also, I thought, much less dexterous with people and feelings and the dynamics of relationships, actually, than I thought, kind of Woody is.
Yeah, the other contrast I would draw with Woody Allen's work is that Woody Allen is much more astute at going for a laugh and getting it.
Yes.
And this film is definitely a comedy, but it has a kind of dourness, or like dour is maybe too harsh, but it wants to try to invite like a comic scenario out of something. I don't know. I'd combine it with drama, I guess. But
I also thought that it's a film in which all the laughs come from Nicolas Cage.
Yeah.
And so I think they're actors' laughs. I think he's so phenomenal in this. He's so great, that he manages to do that in a way that the film actually doesn't.
I had very low expectations about this before seeing it, having seen the trailer, because it made me... It's definitely come from, like, meme culture. And I think I've even seen Nicolas Cage talk about him being a meme, kind of stills and GIFs of his movies,
sure,
spread around, and they're used as like reaction GIFs and that sort of thing. And I think that this film kind of has a basis in that. And, there are real... like, in fact, they even make reference... Well, they don't reference it specifically, but they use the phrase, the most interesting person in the world, in reference to him, because he becomes so interesting because everyone dreams about him. But that phrase, the most interesting man in the world, or the most interesting person in the world, is a meme of its own. It's like, it's one of these pictures that's used in reactions, and it has its own particular set of meanings. And then the thing is, that guy, who's that most interesting man in the world, is... I don't know if he's a celebrity or not, but like, these people, like, what the film is kind of playing with in some degree is that the ways in which we use and propagate images ignore the real people behind them. Like there are actually real people that are in all these images that we use as reactions to things, and kind of it's sort of built to a certain degree out of that.
Yeah.
The thing is, the reason I had low expectations is that it reminds me of The Unbearable Weight of Massive Talent, which I haven't seen, so it's not that I thought that's a terrible film. That was Nicolas Cage's last film, which we never got around to seeing, or one of his most recent, where he was with Pedro Pascal, and he's playing himself, I believe. I think he maybe plays himself and a twin. And, you know, it's kind of a wacky comedy where Nicolas Cage is himself. And the thing is, Nicolas Cage is such a personality in and of himself that it only really makes sense with him. Because he's interesting, because he's a very well-regarded actor, and he's won an Oscar. He's also seen as kind of a joke.
Yes. I mean, his career is so long. For me, one of the great pleasures of watching the film was little things like... you know, because he used to be so beautiful, yeah, in a kind of, he had these droopy eyes and long eyelashes, and of course he had the washboard stomach and the muscles and so on, and he always seemed a bit off, yeah, that, you know, and I thought kind of what an interesting transformation, because I found him really believable as a milquetoast, ordinary person in this film, right? So that's one phase of his career. Obviously, he's had other phases where he's completely over the top.
Yeah.
And, you know, one of the things that you associate with Nicolas Cage is him going OTT, yeah, in certain roles. He's not afraid to be flamboyant. Whereas kind of, you know, this is a very restrained, I think, a very believable performance.
Yeah.
And just watching, you know, so this is, I suppose, a longer thesis on how people, at least people my age, relate to an actor aging on screen, because I kept looking at things like, you know, his hands and the wrinkles on his face and his feet and his legs, right? You know, and kind of, you know, how kind of people's bodies bend over time, and they age and they wrinkle and they get liver spots, right? You know, so kind of while you're watching him, you know, play this ordinary character, who's then kind of made famous, I'm thinking about all of those things.
And the thing about The Unbearable Weight of Massive Talent is that was being sold as this kind of wacky, like Nicolas Cage is himself, what a joke, and that's all where all the jokes come from. And I thought, I really hate the look of this. I really hate the kind of people I reckon who would like to see this. You know, it's very much like there's like a modern kind of snakes on the plane thing going on with it, where it's just like internet culture wants to see this film, and I just don't think that makes for a good film. This looked like it would be playing on that. And then to go online and just type in dream scenario reviews and to see Google coming up with all these audience scores of 1 and 2 stars and people being disappointed is like, people actually, I think, really wanted this wacky thing that I was dreading. And then to find out that it's not what they thought it would be, or not as energetic as they thought it would be, they've been let down by it.
It's had good reviews.
Yeah. Critics seem to have got on with it, I think.
Yeah. So, and I think that's interesting because I found the film very interesting, but also it didn't quite work for me. Yeah, kind of, you know, there were real longers, and, you know, I was thinking, how is this film going to end, and where is it going? And, you know, so I found it more interesting as an idea or as a concept, you know, than as a film. So I don't agree with the reviews, but I also don't agree with the audience. I mean, I think, you know, kind of, this film has a lot more going for it than 1-star audience reviews will suggest.
Yeah.
And maybe cinephiles will find a lot more of interest in the film than the average film goer.
Yeah, I would have to say really very little of this film ended up working for me. It began promisingly because it sets up an interesting idea and starts playing with it in an interesting way. But I think reasonably early on, for me, I would say when it becomes about sex dreams, I thought
that was a mistake.
I started to think this film is already kind of running out of ideas, or at least it's not working through its ideas well enough, because what it ended up kind of doing was going, okay, this guy appears in lots of people's dreams and he's a real guy. What kind of dreams could they be? They start off being, you know, he's just banal and he's just standing there and he does nothing, and it reflects on his ego, which is another interesting thing. But then they're like, okay, well, the dreams should be different now, so maybe they're having sex in some dreams. And then they become about nightmares, and he starts murdering people in the dreams, and that leads to a whole other thing. But it's like the film is going, we've got this basic idea, let's play with the 3 or 4 ways in which it can be sort of manipulated, but it doesn't. To me, it ended up not cohering into anything. It was a series of ideas not well worked through enough.
I don't know. For me, a lot of those ideas hit home.
Yeah.
Right? I'm an academic, so all those things about cancel culture and to a certain extent competition with other academics, or this thing about you stole my ideas from 40 years ago, his relationship with students, and also the whole thing about, do you want to be a celebrity? Or then, the thing about the comparisons to Jordan Peterson, right, as someone who's been canceled, the whole concept of cancel culture, whether you should be responsible. I mean, the questioning of trauma and what is it? And, people you banding that word around kind of, so easily now. And, should the world objectively be responsible for whatever you experience in your mind, psychologically as trauma, however you define it, right? And should other people kind of suffer? To what extent are your rights to your trauma, whatever shape it takes, and to be protected from it? To what extent does, should that impinge on kind of external reality? I think all of those are kind of really interesting questions, I think. That I kind of connected to, right? So again, spoilers, but there's a shift in the film where it goes from just this benign, anonymous almost presence in other people's dreams, where he's in the background, kind of become nightmares, right? And he begins strangling people and brutalizing them and so on. And all of a sudden, he becomes persona non grata on campus. His car gets vandalized. He's asked to leave the university, right? Kind of, and he keeps saying, "Well, but I've done nothing. It's all your dreams. Like, why am I responsible for your dreams?" Right? Like, yeah. And I thought that was all kind of very interesting. Yeah. Now, I did think that there was a problem with the way the film conceived of dreams, because the only way that the film conceived of dreams was pretty much sexual, right? And then they became nightmares, right? So, whereas you could think, well, we have a variety of dreams, like, kind of...
Well, they start off as essentially random before you get into the sex dreams. The film opens with the thing about stuff falling from the sky, which is it's not sexual, it's not violent, it's just a weird dream. So it does have a kind of an idea of dreams as just like how wacky things happen, like the guy walking through the field being chased by a guy who's wearing a tuxedo. It's just kind of wacky. Then it becomes more specific about what kind of dreams it's showing you.
I thought the film didn't do enough about showing the variety of dreams we think about, right? Like I don't know, skydiving or swimming with dolphins, or being in love, or
but also there's the idea of dreams as being
forest or something.
Dreams being the way in which we process things. It's the way in which our subconscious mind handles our fears and anxieties and hopes and all that kind of thing. And the Nicolas Cage character says as much at one point, but the film hasn't actually done anything with that idea.
No, the film
could he be invading someone's dream in which they are processing something? Could it be affecting their decisions? That sort of thing. That's not an idea the film is.
No, I think the film is also really most concerned with this critique also of how even your dreams can be monetized by corporate culture, right? I think the film is too quick to move on to that critique of selling and the sale and of advertising culture, and how social media is not enough. Soon they're going to colonize your dream, to sell you stuff. So
and it doesn't do it funnily enough.
No.
And I think it works too hard on just, it goes too heavy on that idea without doing enough with it. And, like when the sort of PR agency that Nicolas Cage goes to, and they suggest we could get people to drink Sprite maybe by advertising it in the dreams somehow. not to say they've worked out how we'll do that, but that's the idea. And he turns it down. He says, I don't want to do that. I don't want to commodify our dreams. He says something along those lines. And it's like, that is all the film needs actually to do with that idea. When it buys into it later on, it's not then developing it enough in order to make more out of it. It's just going with it.
I would have liked to have seen more of it and for it to have been better. Right, so when they in fact invent the gadget that allows other people to go into dreams and sell them stuff, I would have liked to have seen glossy advertisements, lots of examples, maybe a montage. It felt so inept. Those two guys appearing and I thought that was like a huge disappointment. I would have liked to have seen Sprite commercials with Nicolas Cage, or in dreams. Something equivalent. I mean, it was like so bad, really.
I mean, it felt like an obvious place to go for me, but so many things did. I'm just disappointed that it went for it so heavily without having nothing that creative or inventive going for it.
And it had things that are insulting, that should be questioned more, or at least made funnier. So this whole idea that France is a place where American cultural rejects can find a home is a real prejudice, right? Because, kind of French culture has been as much in thrall to American culture in the 20th century as any other. Yeah. But if you think, okay, well, they worship Jerry Lewis, for example, and kind of, America at the moment doesn't. But if you're going to go there, then make it funnier, right? Because once he arrives in France, and it basically is just kind of a book signing, and yes, they've changed his book and whatever, but it has nothing to do with them being in Paris, right? Like I just thought some things were just not thought through, really.
The writer director is Norwegian.
Ah.
As opposed to American, which I think, so maybe that has some bearing on why France was chosen or what the idea behind it might be. But I don't know. I mean, it didn't occur to me as particularly smart, although it didn't also occur to me as particularly egregious. It was just kind of, I guess, far afield from where he's been affecting people's dreams. He is trying to make this living, and it's been promised to him, and it's not turning out to be what was hoped for.
There's a pointed commentary. Because they say, there's a line where they say something like, well, everybody hates you now, except in France.
Except for the French, yeah.
So, so something is being said about French culture.
It was funny when it was a throwaway line, but then it becomes, a book tour in France.
Yeah. And so kind of, those scenes that take place in Paris, they should have been funnier. I mean, there should have been a reference to it being in Paris, and not just, to wear the hand. What was that? The hand.
Oh, the Freddy Krueger hand. They make him put on a glove for a photo shoot because he's been killing people in their dreams, and they call him Freddy Krueger.
Yeah, so just because you ask him to do that with a French accent, anyway. So I think it's a film full of interesting ideas that are not fleshed through, and that are not rendered very cinematically, and that its biggest strength for me is Nicolas Cage, who I think is astonishing in this. I don't think I've ever seen him better.
Really?
Yeah.
I think it's its only strength, really.
I mean, I've always had mixed feelings, about him. I mean, I've loved him in a lot of things. I love him in Moonlight. And I think I first saw him in Peggy Sue Got Married. And
Moonstruck?
Moonstruck, sorry, yeah. So Moonstruck, Arizona Rising.
Raising Arizona.
All those 80s films, he's phenomenal. And then there was Leaving Las Vegas, I think, that won him the Oscar. And then he became a huge star of action films, right?
Mm-hmm.
So those are kind of like different stages of his persona. And then you're right, he became kind of a joke, really. Yeah, like I think he had a divorce or where he lost all his money. And then he basically took on anything, and he was making like 5 films a year or something, none of which I've seen. But I think this is, even when he was doing those 80s films where kind of he was fresh to the screen and so on, to me, he never quite convinced as an ordinary person. he was always like too goofy.
Mm.
Which I think became part of his persona. But this time, I think you really believe him as a kind of a middle-aged or milquetoast, really. Like, as you know, I mean, to imagine somebody so OTT, kind of as someone who blends into the background, who who appears in corners, who people can't remember and people don't want to invite because he's too boring. And I found him absolutely believable, kind of representing that. Plus, he's got this enormous technical skill where he can get a laugh just out of a line reading, really.
Yeah, it's something I really recognise, particularly from Bad Lieutenant, which he was wonderful in, and it was in A Flicker of the Eyes,
Mm.
or the way in which he laughed and acted in a slightly unusual way, and there's something very Nicolas Cage about, that kind of awkwardness. But I mean, in Bad Lieutenant, he's often doing it in a way that's supposed to intimidate someone, so it really makes sense. Whereas if he was trying to get on with someone and acting that way, you go, I don't get what this guy's doing. But that kind of those little bits of technique or kind of flourishes and bits of flair and things like that do show up here in certain line readings and things. But the obvious reference in terms of his performance, which I think some people will be screaming that we haven't mentioned it so far, is adaptation.
Yes, of course.
Not only in that it's a Charlie Kaufman film and it has some similarity in the kind of it's normal world but a bit weird sort of thing, but he is dour, boring, ordinary milquetoast blends into the background in that film, and then it plays an awful lot with that persona. It's maybe kind of reasonably early film to kind of play with Nicolas Cage persona, even if only in that by this point in his career, it's 2002 adaptation. He had developed a kind of reputation for flair and overacting, maybe. And then you've got a film which is asking him to be as boring as can be.
I'm having a quick look through IMDb because I can't see his filmography on Wiki, so just bear with me.
Yeah, no, he's got such a big filmography; it's got its own page.
Okay. Face Off, of course. That's really, I think, where the OTT stuff might have started. He's got 120 credits as a.
I know, what a list of credits! There's so many of them. How many have you seen?
Basically, from Bad Lieutenant, which is in 2009. I mean, I've seen some of the films, but I don't recognize him in them. Like, I can't remember that he was in Kick-Ass. But the other
he's Big
films,
Daddy. He's the dad character to Chloe Grace Moretz.
But then these films, Tokarev, Outcast, Left Behind, Dying of the Light.
Well, some of these are video on demand. If you look at the Wikipedia page, it gives you notes for the ones that are video on demand, and quite a few of them are.
Okay.
So that may be why you're not recognizing some of them.
I think so basically, for the last 20 years or so, he's done very little that is kind of distinguished, really. And this film just reminds you how good he is, really.
Yeah. I wanted to think a tiny little bit more about the many themes that the film is playing with. Because I don't think it ends up having a real thesis about any of them, but it brings them up. And it's not. This isn't something that I found disappointing. Actually, I thought if it had tried to do something richer with them or more substantial, it would have failed. So these ideas of things like cancel culture, and the film vocalizes the idea of cancel culture, and so the idea is that the Cage character has started murdering people in their dreams and terrorizing them, and he is effectively cancelled because of it. And he won't, as you say, won't be seen on campus. He's basically forced to take leave, vilified. And then that PR company suggests that he could become a hero of cancel culture in the way that, like, Jordan Peterson, Joe Rogan is also mentioned. We can get you on Rogan, and like Joe Rogan's podcast is, I think, the biggest podcast in the world, and it is seen as a kind of intro to the alt-right. And the alt-right is also mentioned in this, and the film essentially is vocalizing this, saying we can get you into the alt-right, seeing it as a kind of place where kind of quote-unquote cancelled grifters make a living. we can make you one of them. And he, turns that idea down. He was not interested in that. But I think it's interesting because it would be so easy for this film to kind of position itself as anti-cancel culture and anti-woke and all that kind of thing. But I like the idea that it brings up those ideas and has its main character turn them down and say, I don't want to be a fucking cancel culture guy. I don't like it. I don't like that stuff. The film is bringing up, the thing that you mentioned about trauma, and and the main character is like, everyone's fucking traumatized these days, but he doesn't go any further with it. It just kind of, it brings up an idea, but then doesn't go on to build an ultimate thesis out of it.
I'm not sure about that, and I think actually the way that you're describing it is the way I like, and it becomes more interesting and complex in conversation because the film is about a man who loses his life, right, because of what other people think, of what other people dream, that he's had nothing to do, he's done nothing to deserve that. He's, none of his actions can correlate to why people think of him in a particular way. It is their dreams.
But that's where I think it would centrally fall down if it tried to make more of it than that, because literally he has done nothing to these people. He's not in control of these dreams, as far as anyone is aware. In real life, the idea is that even if the reaction is ridiculous and far too much, people have done something initially to kick it off.
But what I find interesting in the film is that the film refuses the Jordan Peterson Rogan position. But on the other hand, at the end of the film, this man has lost his life as a result of what other people dream, right? And, it is a dream. It's like, just like, it's a movie. It's not real life, right? Kind of, but, so they're the victims and they're the victims of their own dreams. But he, in reality, is the physical victim of what their dreams do to them, right? So I think that the film is actually much more interesting and complex to think about than that, right? So, because one thing is not equivalent to the other, right? Kind of, it's your dream, but actually it's my reality. And you could say, oh, well, your dream affects your reality, but you're the cause of it, right? Like, whereas actually you kind of, beating me up, it's like your action on me in reality. It's not like whatever you dream of me doing to you. So I think, and he is the one who pays the price at the end, who loses his family, he loses his children, he loses his house, and he loses his job, and that's how the film ends with. Now, I think a better film would have drawn more emotion from that than this one does. But I think kind of, it's an interesting set of ideas coming from contemporary situations and kind of critiquing, our culture that are worth thinking about. And maybe the problem is that actually maybe people thinking about them, will make them more interesting and complex than the film itself does.
The film more substantially reminds me of something like The Lottery, the Shirley Jackson short story.
Okay, I don't know
it. It's from, I think it's from the 60s maybe. And it's about a kind of group of townsfolk who a person in this town is selected by lottery to take on. Basically, they end up being stoned to death by the mob. And the thing that's really kind of viscerally powerful, at least a while since I read it, from what I remember about it, is it's about the viciousness of the mob, the facelessness of the mob, and how they can take on. They can act together. So the film is dealing with this idea because you have this motif running throughout it of Nicolas Cage's work being about the hive mind in ant colonies, and that's like, there's not an accident, right? It's talking about how these ants act together, and the film doesn't go into great detail about it. It's only a motif in the background, but like I think it's really important that like it's pointing you towards the mob.
It's pointing you, well, it kind of. It uses various devices. It refers to the hive mind specifically, both through his research and then through what happens on social media. And then it has all this commentary on Jung and the collective unconscious and so on, that kind of, so it's not just the power of your dream, it's the power of a dream that's shared, right? Because, of course, he appears individually in people's dreams, but the fact that he appears in all of these people's dreams makes it kind of a collective experience of trauma. So
Well, that's quite a scary and powerful idea to me. That's something that really works for me. That you know the way in which people together act differently or encourage each other to act in certain ways, and there's like a tipping point effects, and people start behaving inhumanly towards others because there's basically no. The mob does not in any. I say the mob, the people who are affected by these dreams, are in no way act kind of rationally as the film goes on. Like if it were rational, they would understand that this is just a dream, and the man doesn't do that. And you have that scene where the people who've been affected by this, and they really are. It's funny. It reminded me. This is a little bit of a tangent, but it reminded me when I was at school. I had a dream, and I don't remember what this dream was. But when I woke up, I knew that I hated my friend Harry. And I didn't hate my friend Harry. Harry was fine. But for like 2 weeks, I was kind of a dick to him because something had just like switched in my brain that one night.
So you were like one of these students in this film.
It's not completely like unfathomable that you can actually be affected by your own just stupidity and like delusion and whatever. So you have that scene in here where the kids, because all these kids who are his students are having all these dreams and being traumatized by them, and you have that counselor who the film is kind of. I think the film is always half serious about the kind of things it's showing you, and half mocking them. I think it kind of I think this woman, she's talking about trauma and how your bodies are, or your brains have put these emotional triggers in place to protect you from something that it thinks is dangerous, your teacher. And you're like, yeah, that's quite sensible. But at the same time, there's an element of mockery in it where it's like they're getting the guy to come in and stand at the back of the room. Can he advance 5 paces? Can he advance 10 paces? And will you accept it? It's very obviously silly as well. So the film, I kind of think is the two phrases that came to mind were sitting on the fence and having it both ways. And it's not doing either of those. I think it's genuinely just playing with that idea and not kind of taking a side on it. It's kind of
well, I think it is taking a side. I mean, so Nicolas Cage is the hero, and the film is taking his side. He ends with nothing, so it's not disrespectful to the students who are traumatized, but I don't think it's taking their side either. I mean, that scene where they are with the cognitive psychologist or therapist,
behavioral therapist
in the gym, and when one begins to run away and the other begins to run away. I mean, at the very sound of his voice, I don't think you're meant to feel with them at that point. You're meant to feel with him, right? But he's not making fun of them either.
No, I agree with that. Yeah, so it could very obviously be more taking the piss out of that kind of response, and it's not doing that, which I think gives it a more interesting place than it otherwise might. But I do ultimately think the film really failed for me. I think it, once I started to figure out that I started to feel like it just doesn't really know exactly where it's going, or have any meaningful sense of narrative drive.
Well, I think everything could have been better, that's for sure. And I started looking at my watch.
Took a long time to end, I thought, as well.
Yeah, it did.
I mean, when he goes to see his wife, she's kicked him out of the house for having humiliated her for that apology video. The apology video is another kind of commentary on modern. It made me think of that Kevin Spacey video when he was being vilified, and then he put a video. I think he maybe put a couple of videos out one year after another.
And they were completely cringe. Yeah.
Yeah, and you kind of thought like, but also, I mean, it's not just him. The online apology video is a part of social media culture. Again,
but that's a good example because that's where I thought the film could have been funny, right? Because afterwards, the wife and the daughter say, "Oh, that was so cringe." I didn't see it as cringe. I saw it as a cry from the heart, right? So I think if the filmmaker could have made a joke about it, could have shown how cringy it was, or so on. But I thought there was a real disconnect between what I was feeling about that, which is I felt for him, whilst also thinking this is not going to get you what you want. It's a self-expression thing, rather than making amends thing. But the family's response was bewildering to me. I didn't see why it was cringy.
I think I got that joke. I mean, I took it as a joke immediately when he's done this video, and the video itself, I don't think is especially cringy. I took it as essentially genuine,
Yes,
even
I
though
did.
he starts off with the kind of I'm going to make this video, but it very quickly seems to become a genuine outpouring of pain and grief to the camera, and then that kind of hard cut to his daughter watching it on her phone and going, I'm going to have to kill myself, because she understands what he doesn't, which is how this will play to people.
Right.
That's what the family understands. The family understands this does not look genuine. Doesn't matter what you think it is.
Well, then
that's not how people will take it.
I think the filmmakers should have done a better job of it, because, I remember that point very well when it cuts to the daughter, and I thought, well, kind of, what's so bad about it that makes you want to kill yourself? Really? Like I hadn't seen that, so I think if that's the response you want, then actually it should have been filmed differently. But I do think that it's kind of an unskilled film.
Yes, and I think in terms of cinematic skill, the film is definitely trying to do a few things creatively, audio-visually, that I don't think we've necessarily given it credit for. Or maybe you'd say it doesn't deserve the credit, but I think it's at least trying, with kind of dropping sound out or flashing in imagery.
The editing was interesting.
Yeah.
No, I got all of that, and I appreciate all of that. But I still think, that it's unskilled. I mean, so scenes that are meant to be terrifying really aren't, and they could have been, right? I mean, all those slasher scenes at the end, they could have been more shocking, and they're not. That potential sex scene could have been hotter, and it isn't, though it would have been a problem maybe if it had been hotter. But, there's a lot of things that you could do with the situation, and I just think the film doesn't. And I think the film looks drab, Initially, I thought, they're going for a 1970s Kodachrome look or something, right? Because the look of it was so different than what we're used to seeing. But actually, that kind of dissipates. I didn't get the sense after that first impression that is what they were looking for, that it just kind of became drab, really. So I think in terms of, where the camera's placed, and also the narrating or the drawing in of either laughter or other types of feeling, the film really, worked only sporadically.
Yeah. I mean, essentially, I think it's just not a very good film, and not one I enjoyed very much. But I am heartened that all the people who wanted, a new wacky meme Nicolas Cage film were so disappointed by it. That really makes me happy. So,
well, on that note, thank you all very much for listening. We're eavesdropping at the movies, and we are on
Apple Podcasts, Audible, Google Podcasts, Spotify, SoundCloud, and YouTube. On social media, we're on Facebook and Twitter at Eavesdrop Movies, and Blue Sky, eavesdropping.bsky.social, and the website is eavesdroppingatthemovies.com.
Thank you very much.
Bye-bye. Talking about just memes and stuff briefly, I remember this. I didn't bring this. I forgot it in the Napoleon podcast. Do you know the Democracy Manifest thing? This Australian guy. It's a famous clip now from the 1980s, I think, of maybe the 90s, of this guy who apparently he was like dine and dashing or something, and he's being arrested in a restaurant and dragged out to a police car, and he's saying, "This is Democracy Manifest." And he's like being all demonstrative about, what an appalling thing about his rights it is. And they definitely referenced it in Napoleon.
All right.
Funnily, weirdly. In the scene where they do the coup d'etat, and they go to all the guys in the morning and tell them they've got to resign, or you're coming with us. The one of them is having a succulent breakfast.
I remember that.
And that's a line from Democracy Manifest.
All right.
A meal, a succulent Chinese meal. Definitely it's a reference. which is interesting. Remember in There Will Be Blood when the Kevin J O'Connor, is that the actor's name?
Yes.
Who plays his brother, his half brother, and he
Yeah.
says, "I'm your brother from another mother," and it makes no sense in that context. And
And it's apocryphal language. Anyway.
exactly, but like he just put it in because fucking why not?